Good afternoon. Welcome to the seventh Google Hangout session of the PBL-MOOC. I hope you enjoyed the additional one last week by Amber. Due to some technical difficulties, it was an additional one. If you haven't yet looked at it, I would really advise you to have a look at it because you get some insights from a new tutor who's not involved in this course, but who's doing for the first time online tutorship. And I think it's very interesting to have different perspectives involved in this course. So I think if you would go to the PBL-MOOC YouTube channel, where you also find the other Google Hangouts, you can still view the recordings of that other session. Then some overall comments or reflections. I think that as all of you probably, I was rather shocked about what was going on in Paris, and I do know we have some participants from France. So my thoughts are with them, but also with other people around the world for whom these kinds of attacks are almost part of their daily life. And I think it makes us, or at least me, realize once again how lucky we are to be able to just enjoy this MOOC and organize this kind of MOOCs and having such a learning experience. I think those kind of things put everything into perspective again. I couldn't but say something about this before we actually start. During the observations, we remarked that some of you asked for the results of our observations. So we are very happy to share those results with you. But of course, we haven't yet analyzed them. We are still in the process of collecting the data, and it will take some time to process it. But if you're interested in receiving the results, please just send us an email so that we have your email account, and then we'll send you a report once we're finished analyzing the data. Then some of the groups asked whether they should also mark or evaluate the observator, because it's a team, it's an official team member if you're in the system in NovoEd. Of course, we do not expect you to evaluate the observer, because the observer has also got the instruction for us to do nothing in the group, but just observe. So if you would just put there did not contribute or whatever, that would be sufficient in order to finish the team member evaluation. Okay, then you probably noticed that you are again stuck with me. This time it was planned and not like last week. I'm sorry for you, but the other instructors have other duties to do, and in any case, they gave me some inputs to discuss with you. So all the reflections that are coming after this are part of a joint reflection with all instructors being involved. Next week, we'll try to get Catharine de Rijt and Janet Holmes from University of Maastricht to reflect a little bit on the tutor role. And we hope to have in our, I think that's the final then, the final Google Hangout session, we hope to have Jeroen van Merrienboer joining us. So that's something to look forward to, I think. And then so today I will shortly reflect on what's going on. And in order to do so, we had a look at the discussion forum on the one hand and on the assignments that were submitted this week. Starting with track 1. So there, the assignment was to discuss the role of the tutor in the post-discussion phase in PBL. And there are coming up a lot of interesting learning questions are on the role of the tutor. Should the tutor be the one who provides the resources? Should he or she be guiding the students in their process? The aspect of showing respect also to the team leader, or acknowledging at least the team leader in this group. And Then an interesting one is because it's not only in this track that it comes up, but also in some other tracks, and it's related to misconceptions. In this track, it's related to the tutor as being the person who focuses or who reveals the misconceptions of students and tries to correct them. Trying to correct them does not mean like providing right answers, but like discussing with the students, with the group, on what it actually means, yeah, to follow those misconceptions or what they entail. It's also interesting, and I know I say this every time, that you should look at the work of the other groups, but I really mean it, because also in this week we see some nice overview of students or groups. For instance, there's one group and they made a table with, on the one hand, kind of the role of the tutor within PBL. On the other hand, they have a column where they try to explain the role of a teacher in more conventional learning or teaching. And then they try to apply this to their specific setting, namely English as a second language learning. And it's nice to see because there are some commonalities they identify, and there are still some things to be discussed. And it may inspire your team to think about those things or to contribute to that group with the issues that are still need to be discussed. So please have a look at it and start discussing amongst each other. I think it's really a nice overview. Then, and that's an interesting question, and I'm curious to see next week assignments where normally some answers or reflections should be given on the learning questions you posed this week. There's a group who asked whether there is an influence of the tutor expertise and commitment on the learning outcomes of students. And that's really, I think it's a very important question, because of course we design learning environments and the aim is that students learn something. And then I think it's interesting to see, okay, what can be the influence of the tutor? And yeah, think about, is there a direct effect, or are there other issues that play a role? Is it also dependent on some perceptions of the students or their prior knowledge and so on? So I think it's a really interesting question. In some of the contributions, I also see that you start discussing the role of pedagogical content knowledge. I think it's an interesting and important one. So on the one hand, we have pedagogical knowledge, which is more general, not related to a specific content domain, but it's more like general design of a classroom, for instance, or what you can do to grasp the attention of students. And on the other hand, we have the domain-specific knowledge on the content domain. But in this case, it relates like, are there specific didactical principles for teaching physics, or like the example with the table, English as a second language. So it's interesting to see, and I'm curious how this will play a role in your problem. Another thing is a concern about the tutors, like how can we support them in a way that they can support the learners in their learning process. So that's also an interesting question to investigate. And then one group has a very specific role of the tutor, although I think it's not unique. I think the other groups also relate to this, but do not really express it as such. And that's like how to promote critical analysis in the group. And in order to have that, is there also feedback needed after the PBL session? So these are all interesting things to be handled in track 1. And if we look at the discussion forum of this track, we see that the questions relate mainly on overcoming resistance when changing from a more traditional, conventional teacher setting to PBL. And I think that's closely related to what our participants in track 3 are doing, because they are focusing on implementing change. So I think it's a very important consideration, and I think looking at what participants in track 3 do will also give insight into this question. But of course, it's also interesting to discuss it on the discussion forum. And it reminds me a little bit on a research or a study with it with first-year bachelor students in instructional sciences. Because we know that conceptions and misconceptions play an important role, and it may be that it hampers learning because people have certain conceptions, and it makes them that they are not very open to ideas or information that contradicts those conceptions. So that's why we wanted to ask first-year bachelor students in instructional sciences what they thought about instruction. And so often this is done by asking some statements in that they have to score on a Likert type scale. But because we think that the questions already trigger certain answers, we used or we experimented with another kind of technique. And what we did was we asked them to draw instruction. And first, yeah, they were like, yeah, but I don't really have some good drawing skills. But then we explained, yeah, you can just use some stock mans or whatever. We will not judge you on your drawing talents. But it resulted in some interesting things because overall, the largest group of students, even if they enrolled for instructional sciences, drew a female teacher wearing a skirt, having a ruler in the hand, and pointing to a blackboard. And so what we did, it's a very traditional way of viewing instruction. So our aim was with this course that at the end they would look back at their drawing and then see whether they would change something. But we didn't study that last part. But we were especially, it was a nice way to see how people think. And I think also if you have teachers who are involved in more traditional teaching and they have to make a shift towards problem-based learning, they need to adjust their conceptions about what instruction can be or what their role can be. So that's a short reflection with respect to track 1. If we then look to track 2, they focused on how to design a problem-based course outline. And of course, the first thing in their discussions are what elements should be in a course outline. Course description, should there be objectives, how you organize the course, your learning outcomes, should you put a schedule, and so on. And we see also some questions coming like, what do we expect? What are the assumptions of the students that enter the course? What is the level of prior knowledge? And should we take that into account into our design? Of course, it's an interesting thing because if you design a course, you automatically have some assumptions of the level of the student, but it's very good to think about it and to make them explicit also towards the students who enroll for a course so that they know what is expected. Of course, some participants ask, yeah, but can you be sure of that level? So you can assume a level, but if students enter your course, how can you make sure that they actually are on that level? You never can be sure, of course, but there are some courses who start with a prior knowledge test that they can do online, and then students can see for themselves whether they comply to the level they should have. And often then, if there are some gaps in their prior knowledge, you direct them to certain sources so that they can close those gaps. But it remains, of course, an uncertainty. You never are completely sure what is going on. Another thing that we see is that some of the participants struggle a little bit in designing a course outline and the role of the 4CID model in that. Of course, the 4CID model can help you in designing a course. It's a model of designing a learning environment, and it starts from a task or from tasks. And that may help you in defining a course outline, but it's not something some people think it's contradictory. It's not. You can combine them and it can help you, because if we formulate learning objectives, we haven't yet formulated tasks. And one thing of the 4CID is that you start from the task element. A way to overcome that is to say, okay, we have that learning outcomes, and what does it mean? How can a student, like that you formulate almost, a student can show that he or she has reached this learning outcomes by doing this or this or this. And then you come very closely to defining tasks. Of course, it depends a little bit on the level of detail you're formulating this. But yeah, I think so. It's not contradictory. You can use the 4CID in any case to design your course outline, but probably you will add some additional elements. And another thing that you all are struggling with, or addressing, is that when you design a PBL course outline, that you all identify that there's a need for teachers to collaborate in designing the course. And I think that's indeed a challenging one, but also a very enriching element, because often in more traditional education, teachers just give their course, they think about their course outline without discussing with fellow teachers about what they do. And so here in PBL, because you construct some problem, you start from problem construction, you really need the input of different teachers. And it also, so you have to come to an agreement of what you think is important for learners to learn and what the core of the course should be. And through the discussion, I think you come a step further than doing this on your own. If I look at the discussion for track 2, there are a lot of suggestions made on reading material, so on articles or on researches that people found very helpful. So also have a look at that. If you're stuck, please help one another. And then, yeah, I thought an interesting one. I think there is some, it's interesting because we have a track here on the role of the tutor. And I think you can apply that also to our role, probably. So one group expects from the instructors of this course that we really give very strict guidelines on how a course outline should look like. I don't think we can do this. I don't think it's even something we should do, because you have different outlines, and the process of searching for what you think is a good outline is also part of the process, because it forces you to make decisions and to underpin those decisions. It forces you to look for good examples, to look for literature. And if we would say it has to look like this, it would be a very well-structured task, and I don't think you would come to the learning goals that are aimed at. So again, I think look at one another, what people are doing in the same track, look into the resources that are offered, have an open mind, and I think you'll be able to manage it then. Of course, we will provide some feedback on the assignments then next week again. And then track 3, we see there that most of the groups focus on obstacles that come around when you want to have a transition to PBL. And there again, it's like how to prepare students, how to prepare staffs, how to involve all stakeholders within this process of change. And we see that a number of groups also address in this respect the issue of culture. So if we look at PBL as kind of a Western invention, is it also applicable to other cultures? And how, so that's one element. How can you implement PBL in another culture, or is it something typical Western, or should we adapt it? And of course, this is a very interesting place because in this MOOC, we have people from all around the world who can think about this issue. So I think it's really a nice one to address within the context of this MOOC. But also the other thing is a change process. So there are some resources who describe what an ideal way is to implement change and how to involve stakeholders and the whole process. But of course, this process may also be a typical Western process. So also there, I think some interesting learning questions are there to be investigated, whether also the process of change is related to culture. So the cultural diversity is certainly one of the issues within this track. And as I said before, in track 1, we had some ideas about the misconceptions, the role of the tutor to elicit the misconceptions of the students. When doing those change processes, also there, the conceptions of the different stakeholders are important, and making them explicit is a first step in being able to work with them. One element, and it's what you also see in change literature, is that you have to make sure that you create a sense of urgency. And of course, the question becomes then, how can you create this sense of urgency? Sometimes it's related because there are complaints from the labor market that they say, okay, the students you send who are graduated, they do not comply to what is needed on the job. So that can be an urge, because then you see, okay, we have to look at our curriculum, which does not mean that I say we always have to comply to what the labor market wants, but it can be a reason, and it can be a way or a mean to show that there's an urgency to change. And I think that's an important point. Also there, what cultural factors play a role. How can you involve all stakeholders, and who are your stakeholders in this? Because we limit often ourselves to the students and to the teachers or the supervisor, but often there are other stakeholders. Labor market is one of them, of course, but also people involved on a higher level at university. And there is also some issue about identity change. Changing the way we see ourselves as teachers is also part of this. So again, it comes down to the conception of the teachers. I think these are the reflections for this week. Again, you can still ask questions through the Q&A button on top of the right. For the moment, if I look, I don't see any questions. We are certainly looking forward to seeing how this assignment developed in next week. So the part B, to say so. We will all instructors will have a look at the selection of these assignments to come back and to give kind of an overall impression of what we've seen that you realized in these assignments. In the meantime, you can still also post some concerns on the discussion forum. Have a look at the other groups' contribution. You can really learn from it. As well, content-wise, or problems you're struggling with. As well, I think I was very impressed by the diversity of representations. So some of you just put text, That's of course fine. Some of you make a concept map with all related concepts. Some of you use a real-time board, or they put the Trello screen on it. So different ways of representing how you're working this week. And that's nice to see. Perhaps one thing I also wanted to say, there's one question of participant who put his course, his personal course outline on the discussion forum and asks for feedback. I think it's an interesting thing to do. I had a look at it myself, a quick look, and I see that it's mainly the content aspect that are already addressed. So I think there some suggestions can be made to broaden it and to consider also some other elements. But I think it's a nice way to just ask through the discussion forum and kind of use the participants and the group we have within this MOOC to address some issues that may help you in your practice. I think that's it for this week. I don't see any questions coming, so I suppose that after you watch this on the YouTube channel, you may still have some questions. Please feel free to just post them on the discussion forum, and we'll have a look at it and try to provide an answer or trigger you to finding yourself the answer. Okay, then. Looking forward to seeing you next week, but then I'll be a little bit on the background and let the other ones talk. Have a nice weekend already, and keep up the good work in this MOOC. Bye.